Hello, 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 hello. It's your good friend, Wild Philosopher, once more here with Hound of Heaven to remind you that gnomes are real. And
Yep.
today we will be talking about one of my all-time favorite animes. It might actually be a contender for number one, although Quality Assurance and another world's getting up there. Kill La Kill. If you wanted to say anything about it, Hound.
It's fun times had by all. Uh, I know
Oh,
I've seen you discuss this in the past, so I was like, hey, we need to have these hot takes. We need to air these out to the internet as a whole, so that we can be mocked and face the censure of our peers.
it's precisely. Channel that our inner Socrates, So Kill la Kill, quick recap for those who don't know, and also we're spoiling the whole anime this episode. Kill la Kill is a wonderful little show about a young girl's quest to avenge the murder of her father, featuring superpowered clothes that put on extreme exhibitionist displays whenever they're used. I think every single character in the show is nude multiple times. I think so.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think at least every single character multiple times, some cases multiple episodes, and yet it is an entirely non-erotic television show. So it's a fascinating show. Those of you who watch anime news may have remembered, I think a few months back when the show's creator announced he was being interviewed, and announced that humanity desperately needed more fan service in TV, or the world would cease to exist. And we today are going to be putting up a defense of his doctrine, the fan service and anime doctrine, by talking about why is objectification sometimes a good thing. Before I launch into that, was there anything else you wanted to talk about the show? Some parts we liked, why we want to bring it up? Or?
I mean, it's very stylized. I mean, if you know how Studio Trigger does things, it's cool. I'm still trying to get a Wild Philosopher here to watch Gurren Lagann. Then maybe we'll put out something. We'll drill Max. He will learn to love Kamina as everyone else does. But yeah. This is definitely a show, right? Because the big thing about shonen anime is it does kind of lean heavily into gratuitous fan service at times, and Kill la Kill kind of comments on that, utilizes that, kind of hangs a massive lantern on it, and then uses that to discuss multiple themes. I think some people say it tries to deal with too many themes at one time, but I think it's an interesting show and allows us to have lots of interesting conversations, which for me that's what makes good art, is being able to have it spark kind of internal or external dialogue and conflict, rather than just being something you consume once and then are like, all right, cool, that was flashy. And like this, on the surface, it feels like that's what this show could be, right? It's like, it's bunches of fight scenes. It's got titties galore, right? But yeah, we're gonna take a bit of a we're gonna step back and look at this at a deeper level. And there are a lot of different people who've already tried to approach Kill la Kill from deeper angles. people who kind of discussed like the theology, discussed like its critique of like fascism, its various things. But we're going to be bringing some more obscure thinkers to the field here.
Yeah, today we're talking about Wilhelm Dilthey,
Yes.
Junji, and Alastair MacIntyre. Admittedly, not the most obscure collection for philosophers, but it is interesting you mentioned fascism, and maybe that's a good spot to leap into this, because it's not... I mean, you can talk about the critique of fascism, certainly, but I think it might be more... to narrow down and drill beyond like fascism as some broad category, the specific angle of fascism it tackles is the notion of the polity as machine. Right.
All right.
This was an exceptionally popular metaphor at the start of the 20th century in socialist discourse. Remembering here, just not to say anything about parallels, but most fascists were disgruntled socialists. That was where they got their members from, and especially their theoreticians. Make of that what you will. And that particular metaphor was what then it then got modified in two directions. At a political level, it became sort of the corporatist structure, which just means structure, like polity is a series of organs, with the industry being the organs in question. So the entire state is run as a type of business. But there was also an anthropological dimension. So if you turn to the writings of the futurists or Giovanni Gentile and look at how they understand the human person, they understand the human person entirely as a machine, committed to, involved in an intrinsic activity of violence. That is the thrust of the Futurist Manifesto, for instance, which was a seminal document in early Italian fascism. This then gets sort of picked up, elaborated on, but that remains the metaphysical core of Italian thought for about 20 years. And that, I think, is where we're going to talk about objectification and why it's sometimes good to objectify people. I know it seems a little weird to leap from one to the other, because you'd think that would be a reason not to objectify people.
Yeah, we don't want. Do we want to turn them into machines? What's the?
Do we want to turn them into machines? Bodies without organs. No. Go step back for a moment here and note. Usually when you look at, say, virtues or values, and we can add like ways of seeing the world as a type of non-moral virtue, like so object-based, subject-based. When people defend or critique relativism, that's a value-based. They're not to say they're not engaged in what they think is a correct analysis of reality, but that's a value-based argument, right? If somebody says this contradicts relativism, yes, he's giving you a fact-based argument, but he's also telling you that this contradicts his value system, which in the given example is the value system of no values at all. And what often happens, there are some values that are absolutely wrong all the time. I'm very sorry to break it to people here. I'm not a relativist. Very much to the contrary. There are other values that can be awful in many circumstances, but are also integral to what it means to be a person. Right.
All right.
Questions like love isn't one. Love can destroy you. It can inflict horrible pain on you. And I don't mean romantic love. I just mean love in a generic, like love of friends, love of country, love of family, love of your pet dog, Snoodles.
Yes. This is the John Wick. The John Wick critique.
Precisely. Yeah, love can harm you. But getting rid of love would be 1,000 times worse, right?
Yeah.
Same with, there's a whole bunch of other virtues like that. The family's an amazing example, right? Plenty of examples of awful families out there, but, and not to say that that's not an important question, you know, what makes a good family, what makes a bad family. But if we abolish family or friendship or love entirely, we just destroy major parts of what it means to be a human person. Our relationship to objects and our relationship to ourselves as objects is another example of that. Right? Most of us, I reasonably for granted here that anyone listening to this call has probably heard the various arguments against objectifying people.
Why should we not objectify people?
Why should we not objectify? The thrust of the position is that when you objectify someone, you're not treating them as a subject. Right? People are subjects; they're not objects. And so, you know, when you're treating them as an object, you're treating them as if they're not a subject. And usually I see this get brought up in the realm of, it's after 10 minutes, so we can say naughty words, sexuality. I'm trying to think of another good example. That's the most common one, eh? Can you think of any other major instances off the top of your head?
Yeah. So, yeah,
I guess it implicitly gets brought up in a lot of discussions of labor.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. Like sexuality, reproduction, labor.
Yeah, labor. Yeah. What as the question of work, right? Your employer. Is he treating you as a person, or is he treating you as a subject, or is he treating you as an object?
Yeah.
And we tend to uncritically, sometimes we'll even slide between person and object uncritically. And I say uncritically because once you start digging into it, one of the problems that immediately arises is human beings are objects. Right? We are physical, embodied actors moving through space. As in the external world, sorry.
Yeah.
Not to say we don't have feelings, not to say we don't have sentiments, but human beings are objects. And the elements of our beings that are objects are often of immense importance to ethics. It's easy to say, let's get rid of objectivity, but you then get into all these troubles with, like, what does it mean to treat an ill person? Right? What are ethical obligations to ill people? Do ethical obligations to ill people change whether it's a physical or mental illness? Is there a relationship in ethics between how we ought to treat disabled people and how we ought to treat the sick or elderly? Because there's a shared lack of capacity between all three groups, but that lack of capacity is not necessarily this, or it's not the same cause, and the people who experience it aren't the same way, same type. Yeah, I don't know what's a good way to verbalize this. But you're not necessarily like old age, you know, physical illness and mental or physical disability, you know, being paraplegic, having a learning problem. They all have similar impacts on our activities. And those impacts are irreducibly related to the fact that we are physical beings. And we can go...
Like, I can break my leg. That's an objective statement, right? It's a statement about objects.
Yeah. It's a statement about objects. And Alistair McIntyre points out that one of the traps we fall into when talking about how do we treat disabled people is we assume it's a person who's not... We assume it's a person operating at, I'll just call it normal capacity, treating a disabled individual. But if you think about it, anyone who works with disabled individuals in any capacity, you know, is going to be sick. Maybe they go on maternity leave, right? If a woman has 3 children, she's off on, like, she's suffering a physical, I want to say debility because that makes it sound bad to have the child, but having a child has an impact on your functioning, right? a
Yeah.
huge impact on the physical aspects of your. I mean, also impacts all your mental aspects,
Well,
but
yeah,
the physical aspects.
there's also the factual statement that, like, for instance, I have glasses. That's a disability.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
if
yeah,
I don't have my glasses, I cannot see you, and I need to pay money to see, or drive, or all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it can sound weird to people who like think, okay, disability, that's like having no legs, or being 100% blind. But
Yeah.
real world facts here, that's not how things stack up usually.
I mean,
It's just that having glasses is a very common disability, and we've kind of normalized it and built a lot of infrastructure into society to deal with the fact that lots of people have eye disabilities.
Yeah, it's still potentially major ramifications for driving. Same with I've worked. So a lot of people who work with disabled individuals are disabled themselves, mentally, or it's one of those things. He tends to drive you into the field. Similar to how if you ever work with veterans, you'll find a lot of the people involved are also veterans. It's just who gets attracted to the field.
A lot of people.
A lot of them are epileptic. If you are epileptic, you cannot drive by law. At least here. I don't know about down there. I would assume you can't drive because it's a major risk to everyone else on the road if you have a seizure and you're in an automotive vehicle, right? People get hit and die all the time from individuals having, like, often not epileptic, just seizures in general in cars. But if you're epileptic, that's also, like, it's not like you're having seizures every day. You'll often go months at a time without a seizure. So it is a really interesting question, the sort of the ramifications of having epilepsy and how that affects, your physical life, your legal life, in ways that, like, the impacts there are necessary.
Yeah. So
like
how does like having no legs or having epilepsy, what does that have to do with, like, when we talk about objectification and say, like, for instance, like sexual objectification? What's the connection here?
Well, maybe we'll push off sexual objectification for a moment, because I think it would be weird to switch.
All right.
having no leg. All right, from having no leg.
All right.
Having no leg. The connection here is, like I mentioned, we contrast persons and objects, and we shouldn't be contrasting persons with objects, because part of being a person is being an embodied subject. It's being an object and a subject simultaneously. And when we focus on the subjectivity of a person, obviously there are many benefits to focusing on a person as a subject. Showing deeper emotional regard, paying attention to what's in their soul, what do they want, listening to them. Those are all subjective activities. But there's also a flip side to subjectivity, which is the fact that subjectivity is a psychological, cerebral phenomenon. So you're tending to treat the person as a person absent their body.
Ooh, yep.
There's other issues with subjectivity, as anyone who's floated around philosophical circles knows. Subjectivity tends to treat issues as unreal. It's not necessarily true that subjectivity and relativity are coterminous, but they often do end up getting lumped together. And even if they don't, psychologically, subjectivity tends to undermine what we call experiences of fixity or permanence, or from a more religious angle, experiences of eternity. Not to say, again, that there's something bad about subjectivity. This is my point at the start of this discussion, that oftentimes there's a double-edged sword to virtues. And cultivating a virtue means choosing, like finding what's the good of part of the virtue, and avoiding the extremes or the weird bits, such as treating people as empty minds floating around.
Yes. Brain in, not even a brain in a jar, but ghost.
Yeah, ghost in the machine. Which is another potential objection to, say, like differentiating objects from persons. It tends to devalue objects. Not to say that objects have chairs of the same value as people, because that'd obviously be stupid. But the Western ethics has not developed an ethics of objects. It's developed an ethics of persons. And you can really see this sort of play out in how we treat the environment, for instance.
Ooh.
And people are like, we have to see the Earth as a living being. It's like, well, that might help, but it would also help if people simply developed an ethics of how to treat objects. And that's not a weird statement, because if you think about like the objects in your household, you're probably already following a code with how you treat them.
I don't know. I throw things at walls all the time.
Yeah, treat things well, preserve them. If you know a little bit, if you're a little on the handier side, you'll often be able to repair, preserve, even improve them. Well, people attach memories to objects, like paintings and chairs will often become very important individuals.
Yeah, there's like family heirlooms. There's like, yeah, I know my parents had like preserved like my mom's wedding dress. So yeah. Speaking of clothing and dresses, there, I know that I did not intentionally make that connection, but.
Oh yes, but also yes. Speaking of clothes, it's good that you did make that connection, because I was about to switch to talking about how one of my most sentimental objections is my late uncle's broadsword, which is entirely unrelated to the subject under discussion. So getting up.
We have swords. We have swords.
Baku's, what was it? Yeah, Bakuzan. Bakuzan was the name of Satsuki's sword. But yeah, we can talk about clothing, because it is interesting. One of the themes that gets consistently explored throughout Kill la Kill is this interesting and, as I said, in my mind, false dichotomy between person and object. In terms of, say, Senketsu. Right, so Senketsu is... Ryuku Matoi is the main protagonist, for those who haven't watched the show. Satsuki...
I said, you filth, go watch it.
Yeah. Satsuki, I'm going to, big spoiler here, Satsuki is the big bad guy for the first 3 quarters of the show, I want to say. Yeah, it's about episode 18 where you realize that she's actually been on the protagonist's side the entire time, but she was just in, like, deep cover. So deep cover that she was willing to attempt to decapitate the protagonist multiple times.
As one does.
As one does. This is the importance of good, solid spy work. Yeah, but Satsuki, we will return to some of these characters and discussions more go in depth on them later, because, again, spoiler, you discover Satsuki and Ryoko fight throughout the first 3 quarters of the season. And then they discover that they are sisters. Dun, dun, dun. And in time we're going to talk about family and Kill la Kill, but that's not our main theme, and we might do a second episode on that. Backing up for a moment, Ryuku Matoi gets her I'm going to just call them magic powers for the benefit of those who haven't watched the show.
Magical girl. They're doing magical girl crap with
Wait, it is a magical girl show, isn't it?
Yes, it's a magical girl show. They even have magical girl transformation.
They do. Crap.
You're just now getting that.
Wait, does that mean that the nudist guy is the friendly familiar trope?
Oh, I think the Senketsu is the friendly.
Okay. That's good. It's not the guy who's constantly stripping nude. Awkward. There actually is one that's right in the middle of streaming now that we might do another episode. It's called The Evil. Have you seen The Evil Officer and the Magical Girl Are Falling in Love?
I think I'm aware of it.
Okay, that have you?
No,
yeah.
Kill la Kill is its magical girl show with extra tits.
Yeah. Now that you say that, I'm like, how did I not know it? Thales in the well all over again. Thales in the well all over again. Anyway,
yeah, instead of like
gets her
magical girl chant, they just feed their
blood into the alien clothing. Oh God. God.
It's just now hitting you. All right,
it's just now hitting me. Yes. Sorry, we might talk about the magical officer. We might talk when we bring up family, actually, because that one does have many similar themes to Kill la Kill, with sexual abuse of the magical girl in question. Really. Anywho, Senketsu is her Sailor Moon type. So obvious. her Sailor Moon dress that gives her magical powers when she feeds it blood. And one of the dramatic tensions the show explores throughout its 24-episode run is the question of, like, so on one hand, Senketsu is a person, right? He's sentient, he thinks, he has emotions, he has sentiments. On the other hand, he's a piece of clothing. And beyond being a piece of clothing, he's also a piece of clothing that gives magic weapons. Magic powers, sorry, which means that he not only is being objectified as, he is also being objectified as a weapon of mass devastation.
Based.
I want people to objectify me as a weapon of mass devastation. All right. So, that's what we're going to, I guess, start off with our dramatic tension, and we're going to talk about, like, is there... We can talk... The negatives of the objectification of Senketsu are very obvious. The positives might not be as clear. Or, contrary-wise, the objectification of Ryuko. Did you want to leap in with Han here?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I'll let you, give you the floor for a moment, because you're more eloquent on this topic than me.
How are we connecting that? Are we just talking about Ryuko here, or the difference between Eros? All right.
Well, maybe not Eros with Ryuko, because but
all right. That's okay.
The difference. We'll talk about like yeah.
Not
because Han intends it. This is some of the. So Byung-Chul Han is a continental philosopher, and continental philosophers are some of the most annoying writers on the planet because they have this very specific stylistic technique. For starters, they use they'll use Marxism as a synonym for good, and capitalism is a synonym for bad, when oftentimes they're not talking about anything relating to either of these systems, and they're not even Marxists. Like, a lot of them are very right-wing, like rather openly, and they'll just use this stylistic device. And then the other issue that's more relevant here is their insistence on using intensely erotic language for phenomena that they themselves concede has nothing to do with eroticism. Like, we are not discussing Roland Barthes' discussion of his photograph of his mother. Like, it,
now I want to know. I want to know about it.
Yeah, it's the like. Sometimes, yeah, some of them are really weird. Genuinely, a lot of the times it's just the stylistic techniques that are tolerated in this is mainland European philosophy, in contradistinction either to like philosophy from outside Europe, Islamic, Chinese, Jewish, etc., or what we would call analytic philosophy, which is the major school associated like Anglo-America, so America, Britain, Canada.
All right.
Which is.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, notorious. It's notorious for its emphasis on logic. It's a bit of a false notoriety. There's a lot more discussion of the nature of existence and what it means to be a person, and very important matters than you might think in Anglo-American thought. It just, again, like stylistically, tends to get wrapped under very boring lists of logical postulates.
All right. So should I guess that's the lead into explaining why the terminology I'm about to use is kind of weird.
Yeah, maybe we'll cut Han's terminology and replace it. Yeah.
So I can't say porn and arrows.
Yeah, like because you guys hear like porn and arrows, and then he starts talking about drone strikes as pornographic.
Okay, all right.
Like, you're just like the reader is just sitting there like, come on, man, pick a better pair of terms.
Come on, this is great. This is great. Great YouTube bait.
Great, yeah, great clickbait extraordinary. Han, yeah, we'll let Han. He's still alive. We can let him. He really hates clickbait. We're going to talk about him more on this channel.
Yeah,
so
exactly. We're going to use Byung-Chul Han as clickbait. So anyway, I'll describe it how Han does, and then I'll move it aside. So what would we? So Han writes this book called Agony of Eros. So Eros, love. The erotic, right? And so he's getting this word from Plato and Plato's discussion of Socrates. Now Socrates is talking about what is love. So eros isn't kind of how we modernly think of, just like, oh, it's sexy, right? Eros is like love as love, which kind of has broader implications for Socrates, Plato, and all the people they're talking about. Of course, it does kind of include like things like that as I can never remember the Symposium.
Yeah, so Plato, he has two main discussions. He has the first Alcibiades, which is explicitly on love between a teacher and a student. Everyone's favorite ancient Greek meme-worthy tradition. And then he has the Symposium, which is simply on love in a general sense, and it touches on everyone's favorite teacher-student relationship.
Who shows up at the end? Alcibiades.
It also talks about
Alcibiades, history's favorite disaster bisexual.
Yes, it also talks about friendship, love between husband and wife. Divine love is the real subject of the discussion, though.
Or and well, they even bring up Homer, like the love of creating art, right?
Love of creating art.
Where Homer is like said to have more progeny. So anyway, many people in the Symposium have these various takes on love, including Socrates himself, who says some pretty interesting stuff about how he's talking to this foreign mystic and talking about the choreomantic rituals. We'll probably be getting into that at a later time. Fun stuff. But then our boy Alcibiades shows up, and he goes off on this how his relationship with Socrates again. But interestingly, he talks about kind of how Socrates is like this other that he can kind of never reach, and is like almost an alien to him. He also does wax lyrical about how it sucks that Socrates won't sleep with him. But putting that aside,
yeah, Socrates was very famous for condemning the act of physical contact in the student-teacher relationship of ancient Greece.
Yeah. So Han takes this idea of Eros as what he calls the atopic other, which is like the other you can never fully understand. And for Han, Eros or love is always this encounter with this other, and he contrasts this to what he calls pornography, which I don't know what word you want to replace that with. Seeing as it, like you said, it does get weird later where he's like, yes, drone strikes are pornographic.
Yeah, like drone strikes, attitudes to it. Like, I don't think you read Non-Things Upheaval in the Life World.
No, not yet.
Pornographic attitudes to like TV shows, and physical objects, and it's like this is, and I to be fair to him, it probably is one of the best words he could pick. That it, like, because the notion he's encompassing under his idea is of an exhibitionist and ultimately selfish want by one party that doesn't manifest into true desire because it doesn't acknowledge that the other party exists.
Yeah, so kind of,
which is,
porn kind of serves as a example and stand-in that kind of explains what he's talking about. Like when you're watching porn, there isn't really a person there. It's just kind of your desires pasted onto the screen, right?
Yeah.
There's no real other there. Even if there's like a story, it's like this stupidest story. I think Zizek kind of pointed this out where he's talking about it's like, wow, this this story is stupid. This plumber shows up. It's like, what the heck?
So there's purely peripheral.
There's no other there. There's no transformative person there to be encountered and change you, which is what he's saying Eros is. Eros is that encounter with that transformative other. And I think that actually kind of does track on how we're talking about Kill la Kill here, because when we look at the fan service here, is it something that's just there to like look at, or are we encountering something that's making us think, making us reconsider, kind of changing us or reshaping our minds?
Yeah, and I do think it's pretty clearly the latter. It is not the type of show that you can be. It's not like if you look at, I'm trying to think of another good, I never watched the really fan servicey animes, so I'm struggling to think of, I don't know, Mushoku Tensei maybe?
Mushoku Tensei.
I never watched it because the description was too disgusting.
Yeah, it is kind of weird, but there are still that was just a weird iffy gray area.
Yeah, I'm trying to,
because the main character is an other, but also it never really gets around the fact that the author's being weird about shit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your standard isekai maybe, like the protagonist. They'll narrow in on the female protagonist's chest when she's leaping up and down.
I mean,
I'm not going to say anything mean about that, but they're doing that for they're not doing that to introduce us to the characters.
Yes, this is a nuanced depiction of this person's experiences in this world.
This will have an emotional impact.
Big old elf titties.
Whereas Kill la Kill it's violent in the sense of being shocking. And the extreme coloration used, like the chiaroscuro effects, which for those not familiar with art terms is an extreme contrast of light against dark, utterly destroy any engagement as like fan service.
Mm-hmm.
And
there are moments where it does kind of where the camera is acting more fan servicey, but then there are others like later on as like the characters shift where the way that it's animated is like we're moving out of that line, even though these people are very skimpily clad, we're depicting these as actual action scenes.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, like, the first time I mentioned every single character in the show loses their clothes at some point. And the first time you see that with Satsuki, the main antagonist of the first 3 quarters, is when she smashed into a wall and nearly killed. It's not a fan, like it's not a fan service scene in the conventional sense of the word.
Yeah.
You would have to be a very strange individual, even given today's inclinations, to see it that way. Not to cast shame on whatever. Well, maybe actually. But that aside, back to the discussion of objectivity. So, what was the thread of our argument we were talking?
We were talking about...
Oh, yes, engagement with the other.
Yeah.
Han's point is there's a type of... I'm going to use love and want. As our... I know it's not as nuanced. But it's 100% less weird when we're talking about, like, Iragama Gori's relationship with Satsuki. Which is an other relationship, right?
Yeah. So you're saying you don't want to describe that in erotic terms?
I would prefer not to.
All right.
Because I think it potentially too misleading.
Yeah.
Like you can use this for friendship, right? And you can see this. Aristotle has 3 levels of friendship. At the lowest level, there's the friendship of utility. So if I'm on really good terms with the Starbucks cashier, we know each other's names, we say hi. That's a utility friendship in Aristotle's terms, because our relationship is defined by the fact that I'm going there for coffee, right? If a McDonald's opens up and I decide to go to McDonald's, my friendship with the Starbucks employee is over.
Relationship with Starbucks ended.
Relationship with Starbucks ended. McDonald's. It's because they just lowered the price on coffee. They're $1.50 now. Sorry. Above this, he has pleasure friendships. Same thing, but this is going to be friendship or same like this is. It's still and both of these are types of friendships that are rooted more in the self than in the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like if I am really, really good friend, like let's say I love bowling and I go to the bowling league once a week, twice a week, we all meet up, we go bowling. We're all good. And it's not that we don't like each other. It's that our friendship is defined by the pleasure we take in the act of bowling.
Mm-hmm.
And the friendship is not going to persist if one of us drops a bowling ball on his foot and develops trauma and decides he doesn't want to play bowling anymore.
Yeah, he wants to shoot clay pigeons instead.
Yes. That would be the end of and most friendships people have are pleasure friendships, for the record. Most friendships are. But above that, in Aristotle's 3rd level, we have the sort of true friendship, or what he calls like the friendship of the good, which is where you delight with the good in another person. To put in it means you love the other person as an other, and because your love for them is as another, you want the best for them. Maybe not like necessarily like what they want, but what's objectively best for them. So if your friend gets into gambling or whatever, you will do your absolute best to get them to stop gambling, and you'll also kind of help them out with their debts. Right?
Yeah.
And doing so might involve taking on a substantial amount of harm to your person, but you will persist out of love for your friend.
What's tier 4?
I thought I said there were just 3 tiers. Did I say 4?
I think you said 4. All right, so it's 3 tiers. All right, cool.
My apologies. Yeah, it's 3 tiers. 3 tiers. Utility, which is just use, like if you're making use of another person. If you have good relationships with your employees or coworkers in a workplace, that's utility relationship. And to be clear, there's no shame on that. Like, don't go trying to have. You're probably not going to develop a top level, like a friendship of the good, as Aristotle calls it, with your coworkers. And there's nothing bad about that, unless you really like one of your coworkers and want to go beyond being work acquaintances. Like Aristotle isn't condemning either of these other types of friendships. He's just stating that they are not the highest level, and we should have at least 1 or 2 friendships that go above these.
So they're like Pokemon. You can like evolve them.
You can in fact go from one. Yeah.
But yeah, so how does that relate to, say, Gamagori or maybe Ryuko's relationship with Senketsu? Yeah.
So the reason I mentioned I want to use love and want is Gamagori, who's one of Sasuke's. Sasuke has 4 henchmen, 3 henchmen and a henchwoman, called the 4 elites. It's just like a magical plot. I feel like such adults now.
We need to clip that and make it a short where you just suddenly realize the kill is a magical.
Yeah, go back and clip it. Anyway, Gamagori, she has 4 henchmen. One is a very close childhood friend from kindergarten, Nonan Jakuzure, or Jezukure. The other 3 are people she picked up. All of them, I mean, they're not necessarily. On the one hand, they are friends, but it is a hierarchical friendship.
Yeah.
Which, we'll lay that aside. But it's a true friendship rooted in otherness. Like, their dedication to her and their care for her is absolute, to the extent of being willing to risk everything. Literally everything, because I think most Nonon is quite wealthy, and she just gives it all up to support Satsuki when the latter is attempting to save the world. But and even though they don't necessarily get along with each other, they're willing to put up with the irritations and support each other through thick and through thin, just for the sake of supporting Satsuki in her quest, which is a quest they objectively support, or they support because they think it's true. They think it is an like attempting to enslave humanity and turn them into clothing aliens, turn them into worm food for clothing aliens is evil, and so they support Sasuke in her quest to stop that. That is their moral reasoning, basically.
Yes.
That would be an example of a pure atopic relationship in the Hanian sense. At least as far as, as far as I'm concerned, and given the spatial constraints of anime.
Yeah. All right, and so how do we tie the Byung-Chul Han love and want, as you have censored it for us, back to objectification?
Back to objectification. Yeah. So now we're going to stop talking about the 4 elites and Satsuki, which I picked because that was the most convenient and least controversial example. And we are going to double back to the clothing. The whole show is, it's arranged around these clothes that grant magical powers, and you discover they're actually space aliens and are parasitically feeding off human hosts. And the goal of the real antagonist, Ragyo Kiryuin, who is one nasty, nasty piece of work, is to conquer the world and turn it into a feeding farm for the life fibers. The aliens, sorry.
Yeah.
The protagonists engage with this, or engage in their acts of resistance with a variety of attitudes to clothing. At the most extreme end, you have Nudist Beach, which is a rebel group. And they, it's kind of in the name. It's kind of in the name what their whole shtick is. If you haven't watched it, you're not. It's like, yeah, I said the name, and you're like, oh yeah, Nudist Beach.
No surprise what they do, how they deal with alien clothing.
Yeah, and the stance of Nudist Beach is an almost. In some cases, it borders onto the fanatic rejection of clothing itself. Not simply as objects and as an idea. This is an extreme example of the earlier object versus subject that we mentioned at the very start of the stream. And now it's like they're not being treated as persons; they're being treated as tools for the clothes. And so, in an act of resistance, they go nude.
Yep.
That I can never remember his name. That's the guy who's constantly threatening to kill Ryuko. Tsurugasa? The one with the mohawk.
Yeah.
Any of you watched it, you know who I'm talking about. Yes, sorry. I hear his name. I was rewatching in advance of the stream, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's the guy whose name I can never remember. He's the most extreme example of the clothing is an object, and so he wants no part of it because he's a subject, and because he thinks that because it's an object, it's a predatory attitude to subjects. Right. It reduces his subjecthood. This attitude can be contrasted with Ryuko Matoi, the protagonist, just again, quick reminder, who is willing to, not that she doesn't struggle with the question, right? Especially when she finds out she's part life fiber herself. But again, this is full of spoilers, in case, that's your only warning now. So she does struggle. She is not uncritically, she's not unself-aware of the objectifying status of the clothing. But she engages with it anyways, initially for utility reasons. Right. She starts off wanting to avenge her father's death. The clothing gives her magic powers that helps her do that. She uses the clothing even though it is degrading. As she develops a relationship with the clothing, this increases. It increases, it goes on, and eventually she begins to actually enjoy spending time with Senketsu, the name of the clothing. They spend time as partners.
It moves more from utility friendship to other, or more from object into object/subject.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then by the end of the anime, they have a true, it's the epitome of true friendship. Right? He sacrifices his life for her. And that causes her genuine distress at the thought of being parted from him, not because of anything he might do for her, either in the realm of utility or pleasure, but because she loves him. in a friendly sense. Like they are true friends. Like they have increased the final Aristotelian level, and the loss of that is deeply hurtful. So there's this sort of transformation, and on one level, yeah, it is. She does see him more as a subject, but at another level, I think it's also that her attitude towards Senketsu as an object changes. And you can see her struggling with it. Like they start working together as a team. They work more and more as a team. And of course, when you're working together as a team, it's not simply a question of knowing each other's subjective moods. It's also a question of knowing each other's physical skills. And in this case, using each other's physical skills. Right? Senketsu draws on her blood. She trusts Senketsu to take on new forms the situation requires. He trusts her to make good decisions. Certainly, they have their ups and downs, like when she loses her mind, or the bit where she's briefly chopped up, and then there's almost this one final moment where they're fighting in perfect sync against Nui Harame, who's the secondary antagonist of the show, the one who killed her father. Spoilers. Yeah, if anyone's still watching this and hasn't seen the show, you just know everything now. And then her entire world is shaken because she learns she's part object herself. Right? She learns that she is partially made of life fibers.
Mm.
She's not a pure human being. She's a clothing, and she calls herself a freak. And I actually think it is interesting to talk about. Like I said, I think it's a bad idea. So obviously, if we're talking about people versus inanimate objects, like tables and chairs, like person versus object is fine. But when we compare personhood to objecthood in an objective sense, that's a mistake. Not because people aren't subjects, but because their subjecthood and their objecthood are interrelated.
Yay.
And Ryuko, she has a massive, I want to say, what do you, like, is it a depressive fit? She finds out she's part clothing. The clothing is not just outside her, it's within her. In the words of Iamblichus, I am the other. 4th century Neoplatonist mystic. But anyway, anyone wondering. And she has, how would you even categorize that mental mood?
Not sure.
It's halfway between depression and I almost want to call it like closeted anxiety. Where she's struggling with the loss of herself and the impression that she is this sort of other to everything she thought she knew.
Yes, discovering yourself as other.
Yeah, discovering yourself as another. There's a lovely little quote in Han about he's talking about Hegel, famous German philosopher, and he here. Although one dies in the other, this death is followed by a return to oneself. The reconciled return to oneself out of the other means anything but violent appropriation of the other. Wrongly, this has been declared the main figure of Hegelian thought. Rather, it is the gift of the other, preceded by the surrender, the giving up of one's own self. Han, The Agony of Eros, page 23. So you can see, underneath it's reciprocal, right? The giving up of one's own self means the gift goes both ways. And I think like we want to talk. We were going to focus on objectivity, but if you want to talk about like what it means to have a beautiful death, Senketsu certainly fulfills that through his love with Ryuko.
Yeah.
Which is something Han also talks about, but maybe is too peripheral to the immediate conversation. So back to objectivity. So herself is destroyed. She's in pain, and she nearly dies. She goes and she loses herself entirely. Right. The bad guys entrap her in another bloodthirsty clothing alien, and this one has no relate. This one is again a pure utility. It's only a source of power, but it's using her as a source as much as she's using it. The pure the utility relationships are fine, but they can devolve into pure parasitism, which is why they're like never get into an actual like a romantic utility relationship, for instance. That is the opposite of what you want to be in. Fine with the Starbucks employee, less fine with your husband/wife, or people you would like really close friends. Anywho, she loses herself entirely. Like she almost becomes an object, right? Just a killing machine. And then she's only brought back to herself by was it Satsuki or Munkanshoku?
I don't know, it's been a bit for me.
Yeah, it's been a bit. I was rewatching it. I did not like. I watched it a few years ago, and I tried to rewatch it in advance of the stream, and I only made it to episode 20. So I still remember the broad strokes of the last few episodes, but the specific details are a little hazy. Regardless, she is brought back to herself. And this coming back to herself is what finally allows her relationship with Senketsu it's what finally settles the question of her experiences of herself as a subject, as a person, and as an object. Right. Within Senketsu. And by herself as a person. Like when Senketsu sacrifices himself for her, she is able, that she doesn't suffer, but she's able to move on as a person.
Yeah.
And grow. And that I think is the most explicit example of objectification. We can go into at least, there's my other notes were objectification and knowledge, and I sort of had objectification in the spirit. I'm not sure. Well, yeah, we can actually bring that up.
All right, yeah.
We can bring because you mentioned like she sees herself as object and subject. There's an ongoing. I mentioned way back at the start of the stream that one of the problems with excessively devaluing objectification and excessively championing subjectification is that we come to have a purely negative or condemnatory or disinterested attitude to things that are objects, which are like we can talk about people. We can also talk about like just everything in your house, right? If you have a backyard, everything in your backyard. If you live like the world of nature, plants are animate, but they are basically objects as far as people are concerned, right? There's one group of like the human animals category where like most people tend to think you're truly sadistic. Even people who eat meat tend to think you're a true sadist if you're cruel to an animal, right? And I think I've mentioned before on the stream how that's not actually irrational. There's some people sometimes think like it's a. Most of us, on the other hand, do not have a strong emotional response to people destroying plants.
Yeah, nobody gets upset about you cutting up a lettuce.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, food I'm about to eat is one thing, but when we go around through the woods, there's an exception, of course, for like those of you who are really into hiking. Probably spent time in the Boy Scouts, and you would have gotten a basic environmental ethic if you did. Which would have precluded things like wanton devastation to the trees. But for many others, like people, they'll just commit random atrocities to physical objects. And certainly there is a world of discrepancy between what you do to plants and chairs and what you do to your fellow human beings. Let's be very clear.
Yeah, not a lot of people are going full John Wick because you ran into their tree.
You really like that tree. He took the. You read the.
My wife gave me that tree before she died. She planted it.
My wife gave me that tree. My wife gave me it. You messed with my shrubbery. Prepare to die. But yeah, no. But when we just have an intrinsically indifferent or negative attitude towards like objects or object-like entities, plants, or pure objects, sorry, it leads to a complete lack of, say, care, or even a comparative lack of care towards how we treat those objects. And you see this, I mean, you see this with a lot of environmental issues. It is really weird that people need to cognize these as like apocalyptic level threats or abstract discussions about carbon rather than, say, the concrete particulars of their local forests and woodlands and farms and even plains, like the grass, like if you're in the middle of Wisconsin or Wyoming, sorry, the nearby plains are part of the ecology too, and a vital part. And then you also see this like physical objects. There has been a massive, almost comical decrease in quality over the last, 20, 30 years. It's been going on much longer, but it's like precipitous decline. We almost want to go to shopping at antique markets rather than buy anything from a major corporation, no matter the quality level.
Yeah. Well, yeah. To make the not to make the continental move of calling everything capitalism, but hey, their planned obsolescence is a thing.
Yeah. It's an extreme instrumentality for those who are capitalists and don't want to like. It's just an extreme instrumentality. You're not that objects are things in themselves, but if they're treated purely instrumentally, this is what tends to happen. And so there's this discussion. It tends to occur at the margins of philosophy, but a lot of the most important philosophical thinkers of over the last couple centuries have weighed in on it about how can we transform the way we treat objects. Right. Is there a way to treat something that is a pure object, chairs, clothes, my walls, piles of rocks, etc. Maybe like that's the latter is super ethically important, but is there a way to,
there's also you mentioned sick people earlier, but like I think the easiest thing to talk about people as objects is what do we do with someone in a coma? They're way less subject than object.
Yeah. Oh, that one's an ethical. I took bioethics was my specialty in university. Mm-hmm. That one is an absolute legislative nightmare. Yeah. It is such a gong show. Because like there have been cases where people have suffered horrible injuries. They've been in comas for months. Their family, the doctors kept saying they were dead, give him up for dead. Like this individual, he's in a coma, he'll never come back. The family persisted. And sometimes they're even semi-conscious, they just can't communicate. Which is a distinct, and then they finally regain consciousness or the ability to speak, and they sue their family, arguing that they should have been allowed to die. And I'm not saying this to make fun of such people. Like, it is an interesting ethical discussion about like how to treat people in comas, and like, I hate to say it, obviously, if you're in a coma, you're not medically consenting to anything. But what does that entail for how you're supposed to treat someone? And this is admittedly a lot more of a problem within Anglo-American ethics, which are rooted in notions of rational consent, than it might be in another ethic, like Confucian role ethics, for instance. Where you're not to say that you can do whatever, like that Confucianism has no notion of consent, but it doesn't give it quite the absolute status it has in the Kantian inspired like Lockean Kantian rational consent and rights tradition that we have inherited as Anglo-Americans. But anywho, is there a way to transform our experience of objects versus, and then say, like, there's a fascinating quote from Wittgenstein. The light work sheds is a beautiful light, which, however, only shines with real beauty if it is illuminated by yet another light. And this quote, it's from his very, very controversial works on his relationship with God, which, at least in my reading, that would be the light in question, right? The light of the divine. Hegel has a similar discussion in his notion, like famous master-slave dialectic. Hans Georg Gadamer points out that this is often misunderstood as a negative discussion on like labor rights, which is certainly true. To be very, like, Hegel had very definite moral views on how you're supposed to treat workers, which were much more aggressively reformatory than most people think. But Hegel's actual discussion there is the problem. His discussion there is the fact that even if the slave owns the means of his own production, to quote from the most famous critic of Hegel, Karl Marx, the slave is still enslaved provided the work in question remains a matter of pure work, right? Drudgery. There has to be something to transform the engagement, like his physical labor or intellectual labor, because for Hegel, like, labors of the mind are just maybe not quite as draining as physical labor, but certainly real, and not to be discounted. There has to be something to transform that labor and make it. Hegel was Christian, so he's going to use the word divine. If you're secular or irreligious, you can choose another, like, pick a more meaningful, like maybe use the word meaningful, profound. Word swap it out until you get it. Well, yeah. Wild philosopher's ongoing quest to create the world's most perfect atheist philosophy, so we can shadow box it. But back to Kill la Kill. Back to Kill la Kill. Actually, we were sort of on topic there. I can't remember how we got onto the topic, but we are on topic. We're talking about
objectification in the spirit.
Yes, yeah. And you can sort of see this in terms of how the show cognizes, or not cognizes, how it depicts So these are depictions of labor within the university or the high school. Hanoji, it's a high school show with people in magical uniforms that the guy who was not aware it was a magical girl. Oh, man, sorry. Like it didn't even click that there was a reason for it all being at a high school, like as opposed to a university. It's like, oh man, brilliant, brilliant maneuvers from Wild Philosopher here. The high school is this hierarchy. This hierarchy is based on work in the most brutal sense. Like it is, I think extreme Darwinism would be a apt comparison. Would you say that's like a fit description of how, like,
Maybe.
it's your performance militarily affects your rise through the school grounds. So like military Darwinism.
Yep.
And it also affects it doesn't just affect your social standing in the sense of how people see you. It also affects your ability to survive, because Enoji Academy controls the city and distributes resources based on your power level.
Yeah, so if you're good at blowing people up, your family gets to live in a nicer house.
Yes. Which actually is another relationship with objectivity and objectification.
Yep.
Questions
if you're a good enough object, you can eat.
Sure, yeah. And you talked about, but we can talk about like food quality in real life.
Yep.
That is absolutely is an ethical issue. The quality of food people have. Sometimes it's an entirely your fault ethical issue if you're just eating crappy food all the time, and you have the money to eat something better, and you live near like the farmer's market, but you're like, no, I am 100% content with fried chicken.
Me looking at my extreme caffeinated beverages.
Yeah.
I am being a very ethical person.
I had fresh salmon and mushrooms for dinner. But yeah, like that, how you treat your body and how you treat the bodies of other people. Because like if you have a family, you're going to do things like cook for them, hopefully. If you have a spouse, if you have friends, you'll do things like cook for them, bring them food, bring them sweets, take them out on activities. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every friendship is different, but like in a broad sense, we can expect exchanges of food are pretty basic to friendship.
Mm-hmm.
Often explicitly so if you're outside of the West. Like giving gifts and gifts of food and books, for instance, is very common with Arabs, at least here. But back to sorry, that was a related tangent, but still a tangent. Honoji Academy, your basis, it's all based on strength, and the goal of this is to train an army. Like Bill, in the immortal words of everyone's favorite philosopher, Sauron, build me an army worthy of Mordor. That is Ragyu Kiryuin's command to Satsuki Kirin, and Satsuki does her best. And like Sauron, her army is defeated in 5 minutes.
Fun.
Well, yeah, like they have no will. They lack the. I mean, in one sense, what happens to them is sort of inescapable because it's literal mind controlled tech. But in another sense, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to read that symbolism. To read symbolism into sort of how they're just dominated from their minds, which none of them have really exercised because they've focused on improving strength.
Well, they're treated as pure object rather than object and subject, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, uh, they act like it. Back to like our earlier episodes where we talk about like stereotype. I guess if we're going to get like really symbolic here, you treat someone like an object long enough, maybe they'll act like that.
Yeah. Well, and it's even incentivized.
Mm.
In this case, it's not even implicit; it's incentivized, right? That was the whole episode. Was it episode 7, episode 8, where they decide to start a fight club, and Mankin Shoku, who's Ryuku's best friend / love interest, gets promoted up the ranks, and as her family gets higher and higher up, they spend less. Like they start off, having these amazing family dinners. They all eat together. They're really weird, like family dinners, because the food quality sucks and they're in this rundown shack in the slums. But the essential elements of the family dinner are all there. And as they become wealthier, they spend less time with each other as a family. To the point where they're just not even talking to each other at a certain level. And it is only when Ryoku refuses to fight Mankan Shoku in an effort to... Mankan Shoku's she's given an opportunity to beat Ryoku, to hit the top social rank, get even more good stuff. And it's only when Ryoku refuses to fight back, because she doesn't want to fight her friend, that Mankan Shoku is... to borrow a term from Walter Benjamin, it's a Schockerlebnis, shock experience, that reveals reality to her, which is Benjamin's more secular reinterpretation of Socrates' philosophy starts with a miracle, tathomazane.
Yep.
But yeah, you could talk about it as almost a miracle, because Mankan Shoku goes from, she goes back down the friendship ladder, although you can argue that maybe by that point they haven't had a true friendship yet, where she's no longer seeing Ryoku as an other, she's seeing Ryoku as a tool. Right, beat her up, go up another level on the social ladder. And it's Ryoku who sees Mankan Shoku as a true friend, and is willing to she's willing to support Mankan Shoku even if it leads to harm for herself. Right.
Yeah.
And it's that experience, this experience of an other that's giving you the full recognition that in a way you've denied to them, that finally shocks Mankan Shoku back to herself. And leads to the restoration of, in one sense, the restoration of their original relationship, but it's then further growth. Because by this point, I guess we only see them starting to date at the end of the show, so we don't know where it goes from there. But sorry.
Yep.
So yeah, it's this world of pure object, and the hope of Satsuki is that by treating them this way, she will create a militia that can fight her mother. It fails in 5 minutes. Not even. I think it's 5 seconds in the T. It goes from this entire army right here to, and now I have no army.
Yeah.
In I want to say 5 to 10 seconds. Ragyu breaks out of this. She's been impaled. She breaks off using her alien powers and the assistance of her loyal secretary.
By the way, I've seen other people comment on the they went almost Zack Schneider with the level of Jesus imagery all across the board, crosses everywhere, multiple crucifixions. We go on.
Who's Zack Snyder?
Is that am I using the wrong name? It's
Wait, what did he direct?
he did the Man of Steel, he did 300.
Oh yeah, man, it was 300. Okay. Sorry, you can talk about we total digression here. I practice Renaissance Renaissance memory arts in the tradition of Giordani Bruno, and not only can you use those to remember things, you can also use those to forget things, like Hollywood actors who I don't want them taking up a place in my mind. So no, I will vaguely
banished Zack Snyder to the Shadow Realm.
Yes, I banish thee, Zack Snyder, with my Giordani Bruno memory palace arts. It's a useful technique when annoying stuff that you want to forget. Plus, an infinite source of conversation at parties, because people be like, "Do you see this Marvel movie?" Wait,
no, I've intentionally forgotten that.
and then they can give you the whole story, and they're excited because now you're talking to them about something they like, and you're like, oh, and if you're learning something for the first time again. It's great.
Like that.
Like, oh yeah, you don't have to feign showing interest because you're like, wow, I don't remember who this Iron War Machine, not Iron Man, the other guy with the shoulder cannon. Whatever. Whatever. Where were we? Yeah, back to Kill la Kill. Oh yeah, it fails immediately. Lots of Jesus imagery. And it's not because Satsuki should not have been teaching them how to fight, right? Like, if she designed a pacifist brigade of people who were skilled dialecticians, it would have been an even quicker combat. Faster than 5 seconds. Hegelian dialecticians. The reason it's that she failed to connect their status as objects to any deeper engagement with who they are as people. There was only pure competition. In this case, the not so invisible hand of the Academy, Adam Smith. The wealth of high schools. Magical girl Adam Smith. Dog-eared copy in Sasuke's library.
That's another clip moment there. Army falls apart.
The army falls apart. Yes, and they haven't been treated as people. They've been treated as pure objects rather than the type of reintegration that was needed. And at the end of the reintegration does happen. Right. Like after they're like from being treated as objects, they become objects because they are eaten by the demonic clothing. They are consumed by the object. And yet when they come out, it's not like they fully endorse the nudist beach ethos of, again, it's in the name. It's instead you see them wearing the uniform. They wear uniforms once more, but this time as people and not as objects.
Yep.
There's a point on this in Xenophon's major work on economics, which is called the Economicus, or the Economics in Greek.
In case you forgot what it's about.
It's just a book on the basics of running a household, laws of the household. But there's a fascinating point that a number of commentators, among them Leo Strauss, have noted that the word Xenophon, the whole thing is a discussion of order and how are you supposed to order a household. And yet Xenophon willfully eschews taxa, the main word used for order in ancient Greece, with its connotations of military order, in favor of choria. He uses a word that properly means ornament, and it's a very obscure word that connotes order in a musical or aesthetic sense. And this isn't just him being super philosophical, because Xenophon was a soldier. He was a famous military general. His best known work is his description of how he led 10,000 Greeks over the Turkish mountains in winter while they were being attacked from every side by over 100,000 Persians. So he was a...
So he's like the reverse of like the Von Trapp dude from Sound of Music. He's like, nah, we are not running this household like a military.
Yeah, almost the reverse of Sound of Music, actually. Like Sound of Music is the guy running a household as a military who then comes to appreciate the power of the chorus. Xenophon is a military figure who appreciates. Well, yeah, actually, maybe pretty similar. Xenophon, protagonist of the Sound of Music. Yeah, but it is interesting that like when he willfully eschews talking about the household as a matter of military hierarchy, this is not him being some woefully emasculate philosopher with no engagement with the physical world or the martial and sordid aspects. This is somebody who fought in some of the most brutal military campaigns of ancient Greece. Like multiple campaigns, was an experienced field commander, willfully choosing to eschew using military terminology. And this echoes throughout his entire discussion. He's talking about the ordering of the household, but it is very clear from the language that he's using it as an allegory both for the human soul and the political state. And in fact, much of the work doesn't concern the relationship between husband and wife as other, which is why it's been translated and commentated on a lot more recently, mostly to talk about, academics and their passion for talk of gender. But his Xenophon's main concern is other and manifesting proper discipline or care. Epimeleia is the Greek word there, which connects to sort of kill. Sorry, to draw this back to our main discussion in terms of like, it's not that they suddenly abandon the objectivity or engagement with objects. It's that their engagement deepens and is transformed through personification.
Yeah, so Satsuki learns the lesson of Sound of Music.
Yes. Thanks to the power of Xenophon. Yeah, she learns the power of Sound of Music. There is a very poignant scene in, I want to say episode 22, where she concedes, the reality of watching everything she strove for be destroyed, and then horrible things just happen, like truly, truly horrible. It is a remarkably dark show, given that it's by and for, or about and for high schoolers. Satsuki, like, tortured, abused, manages to escape thanks to her friends, and basically shakes her view of the world. And she is finally able to, to quote Han, actually, she's finally able to gaze on Ryuko. The first few 2/3 of the show, she's using Ryuko as a tool. They in a way, they're actually on the same side in a way that Ryuko doesn't know, but she is still using her as a tool. Which in Hanian terms, Han contrasts the other to the same, the myself to the not me, right? And when we look at people as tools, we see them as things that are useful to myself. We don't see them for who they are on their own terms, which again is it's a hard thing to do. So no, this isn't a let's cast shame on people type story or session. But Satsuki, it's only after she manages to escape and meet Ryuko and engage in this, they engage in a violent confrontation. And it's only at the end of this that she's able to gaze on Ryuko and see the other. And I occasionally talk about how I think Han is much more influenced by Confucianism than he lets on. In Confucian thought, it's gazing, or the Chinese term is guan. Apologies for not pronouncing that with the right tone. But yeah, guan, that allows us to wake up from our self-imposed, the word, the word is usually translated boorishness. I suspect there are several other and possibly better meanings to the same word, lo. But it allows us to wake up and become persons, because the gaze is what awakens the heart. And this is Junji, but he's drawing heavily on a passage of from the Analects of Confucius, where Confucius says that if you want to see, you have to start with prayer. Which, it's like the goal is to open the heart in prayer. That's the whole thrust here. So, yeah, sorry, Satsuki finally able to see Ryuko, and this is what then leads to her transformed relationships with everyone else. Having one atopic relationship has allowed her to, it's dropped the scales from her eyes, I think is the English idiom. Is that still commonly used? I know there was...
I mean, I'm familiar with it.
Okay. Yeah, it drops the scales from her eyes. So yeah, I think that about covers that angle. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about in terms of the other in work? Or the other in the spirit, or objectification in the spirit, sorry.
Not really.
Yeah, so we have been going for an hour and 40 minutes. The last subject or so on the list, there was objectification in knowledge, and then there was another one. We might have to do this in 2 sessions, actually. Because we have not gotten into... Yeah, well, there might have to be a part 2 here, because we can go into... Any of you who have sort of studied anything to do with reasoning know that right now objectivity has been jettisoned from the universities. And that's not for entirely ridiculous reasons. There was the sort of... In the Enlightenment, they developed these dichotomies between fact and value, and object-oriented or objective or subjective. And the notion is the implicit idea behind most Enlightenment theory is the less human something is, or the less dependent on the human it is, the more real it is. And contrary-wise, the more human something is, the less real it is. This is most explicit in a group of figures called the philosophes, the French philosophes, disciples of Voltaire, responsible for the French Revolution. Kant nods to it in his Was ist Aufklärung, what is enlightenment, but he doesn't really stick with it. Later he graduated from it. And Hegel was deeply concerned about how this type of dichotomy would splinter the human experience by making morality unfactual and making facts non-moral on the one hand, and then on the other hand, by separating subject from object, it reduces, people just become minds. And I know Hegel is the guy who's most famous for his philosophy of absolute spirit, and I think people seize on the word and on Hegel's immense emphasis on concepts and think he has some objection to the body. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, Hegel was very worried about the what we might call the objectivity of knowledge, mostly because he was prescient about the fact that all knowledge humans have is oriented to what it means. It's oriented to questions of and perspectives of humanity. Right. There is no knowledge that is not involved in social subjective matters. Usually intimately, often implicitly. And so in the 60s, this was proven like in a massive cascade of cases, and it led academics to conclude you sort of had you had a number of splinter groups. You had people who have continued an increasingly embattled like hold fast of academics who have continued to defend the Enlightenment view. And then you had some individuals who attempted to surmount the problem and create realist subjective positions, or like blend, we call it transcendental modernism or meta-modernism, or whatever they call it. They come up with weird names for their movements. But like philosophies that blend subject and object, which is what we've been doing throughout this. So we're, I guess, in that latter category. Although we're approaching this from a more implicitly religious lens. You had a third group of academics who went, okay, so there is nothing that's not tied to the subject, right? Like everything is tied. Like even experiences of like death and warfare are tied to, like, people don't just die arbitrarily; they die as part of like social actions. And you can really see this if you start proposing alternative methods of fighting to people and look at like the confusion in their eyes. Like, why don't we fight in one-on-one jousting matches to the death? It would save millions of lives, right? And people look at you and confused, and they're like, nobody would do that because people like the other enemy wouldn't respect that, and they'd like use all their drones to blow you up. Which is Hans' comment about like war. War has changed over the last century, and it's changed from a sort of an experience between groups of people on the battlefield to a type of absolute power quest fought largely between automated military systems.
Yeah, say what you want about the toxicity on display for the heroes of the Trojan War. Let's bring back ancient Greek heroic one-on-one combat.
Well, yeah, just as if we're talking about saving lives, right, and settling disputes, it really doesn't, like, there's no need to blow your and the other person country's entire to smithereens. Yeah, which isn't to say I think that this is the objective answer. I'm just saying there are other ways to fight war other than systematic mass drone strikes.
Yeah. Like what is more ethical? Not necessarily the right choice. One-on-one combat or accidentally killing civilians in the street.
Yeah, and people say it's not possible, but it's like, well, people did one-on-one combat all the time in the past. Yeah. There's all sorts of ways. We are not bound, even by technology, we're not bound to fight that way. Like, social people will die for social expectations, and they will die according to social expectations. Anywho, in the 60s, there's a group of scholars who go, well, therefore objectivity doesn't exist. Everything is just subjective, but they preserve the Enlightenment notion that what is subjective is not real. This is what we call postmodernism. Or, which isn't the best label, but yeah, like, wait, you want to talk about postmodernism? When they say they don't believe in truth, they're rejecting it because of a very specific understanding of objectivity. Now, as I said earlier, I'm not a relativist, so you can tell I'm going to be critical of this position, but we'll try to be charitable here. I am worried, or one of the things that worries me is I have read a lot get out of this, and most of them, they're grounded in a realist ethics of like pure subjectivity. And I don't think they realize that objectivity is not simply a question of our knowledge of objects generically. It's also a question of our knowledge of objects as people, in the explicit sense that our understanding of everyone else is done through the world of objects. Right. So I think way at the start I said we're going to talk about some weird figures, and we're going to talk about Wilhelm Dilthey. Wilhelm Dilthey was a very famous philosopher of science, most commonly associated with hermeneutics. And Dilthey, we will be connecting this back to Kill la Kill in just a moment. So I know this sounds like a really weird... Yeah, I know people out there like, ooh, Wilhelm Dilthey. I don't want to listen to Wilhelm. I want Kill la Kill. Bye. Wilhelm Dilthey was a Kantian philosopher, follower of Immanuel Kant. And he disagreed heavily with Hegel, especially about the rather obvious mystical portions of Hegel's philosophy. But Dilthey was keenly aware of the fact that we gain knowledge of the world, and the world includes other people. Right. It includes plants, animals. It also includes other people. We do not have unmediated contact with other people. Our contact is mediated between signs. Just like words are the most. This is mostly a discussion of words. For instance, we are not using complex enough models. You're not like I'm waving my hands all over the place. No, none of you will have noticed. Hand gestures, of course, are another type of nonverbal communication. I got my expressions. I'm it's pretty sad right now that I can't wave my hands at you. But I don't think my computer would be able to handle that piece of garbage. So back to neutral expression. But yeah, like expressions, hand gestures, touch. And then, of course, I say words, but words can be further broken down into, this is all conventional speech, but I could have done this whole thing in poetry. If I were an absolute master of like metaphor, we could have done 2 hours of poetic philosophy. I'm not, so we're not doing that.
We could have done this in sign language too. So yeah,
yes, could have done the whole thing in sign language. But yeah, there are different types of ways of using words.
So that's what's that's a nice symbol. All right.
Yes. So this in Dilthey thus discovers or realizes that there's a gulf between what we call explanation, which is our ability to digest external symbols. He's thinking about scientific ones, but this applies just as well to any other symbols, and understanding. And when it comes to other people, we want understanding, but understanding is purely psychological.
All right. And so can I kind of translate that a little bit? So basically, back to the object thing. If I'm seeing where we're going here, is even our communications are objects, right? Like we're making kind of between the gulf of your little psychic field or whatever and mine. We are communicating by forming vibrations in the air, or making hand gestures if one of us is deaf, and so our thoughts are mediated through these movements of objects. Is that where we're going?
Yeah. All knowledge, and there's an additional element here. Dilthey was deeply concerned with historicism, the view that knowledge is historically grounded. We can put that aside for the purpose of staying on Kill la Kill based discussion. I have another stream. It's in the, if you go down to the video description, you'll see it's called Historicism Explained. I take a deep dive into what is historicism, why did it exist, historicism was a load of baloney. very anyone who thinks ideas, the truth of ideas, is related to their historical time period is off their rocker. Especially nowadays, like that's still your ethical system, or but we shouldn't neglect the disputes they had, because they were about real philosophical issues that bear on us. And one of them is the fact that our communication is objective. It's object-oriented. And a shift out of an attempt to get away from the objective into the purely subjective threatens the reliability of our communications.
All right.
And this isn't just...
We can't rely on the sound, vibrating sound waves.
We can't rely on the meanings we derive from them.
Yeah.
To reveal the other.
How do I know you even mean anything by like the noises that are coming out of my computer microphones?
Yeah. Well, and shared meanings. There's a whole host of other. I'm to keep things brief. I am redacting hundreds of pages of argument on multiple different issues, such as like word connotations and such, like, so we can keep moving forward. Suffice it to say, Dilthey has a much stronger argument than it might look like I'm presenting here, and others have since made it even stronger.
All right.
Well, knowledge is it occurs in the realm of objects, and communication occurs, and this isn't just an issue for like academic philosophers. This is an intimately personal issue. We were talking about like my knowledge of and relation to other people. What happens when the communication or the knowledge breaks down because it's no longer objective? And the massive loss of trust in the internet is an amazing example of that, right?
All right.
Like, if you think most people we have no trust in what other people say. There's good rational reasons for that. Like, the internet is full of lies. But it's nonetheless true that if you're not, like, the more you lapse into cynicism, the less you're capable of trusting, the less capable you are of making that communication with the other, right? Because you're not able to open your heart to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's maybe not such an issue on Twitter, where the other is some stark raving lunatic who sounds like he's on crack cocaine and might very well be. But potentially a much bigger issue if that then echoes into your daily life or into other types of like the chat streamer relationship, for instance, is potentially you guys are pretty silent, but it's potentially a much more profound relationship because we can have lengthy conversations.
Yep.
I can even invite you like into the stream somehow. Like if somebody was really getting into it in the comments, I could be like, "Come on board, broskies. We'll talk this out in discussion." But yeah, loss of faith, right? Loss of faith in the object and in its possibility of knowledge. This happens, I guess, several times in Kill la Kill, mostly if we're talking about martial knowledge, and Ryuku's struggles with Senketsu. It also happens like every time there's a shift in a character's knowledge in the show. Most of the major shifts, it's not just... Okay, there's instances where it's just pieces of information, like when they learn... What was it? Death Trap Day?
Yeah, well, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, episode 4, they all have to get to class on time or they're expelled.
Yes.
It's a piece of knowledge that shocks Ryuko, but it's not a profound piece of knowledge because it's just like, what the heck? I have to run this death course? It's mostly, it's played up as comical to the audience. It's certainly, that's a fun episode, very funny episode. If we're talking about shocking information and the way it completely disrupts these sorts of knowledge, it's going to be the whole sequence of revelations about the alien invasion, the fact that Ryuko is a human experimented on by her own mother to create some alien death trap, or alien death machine. And the nature of these communications, they disrupt Ryuko's faith. Not just like, I mean, we already spoke about how they disrupt like her faith in Senketsu, or faith in herself, but they also disrupt her faith in the communications she's even making. She falsely assumes, for instance, that her teacher knew that she was half life fiber and was willfully withholding, and was the daughter of Ragyu Kiryuin, and was willfully withholding the information from her. And this leads her to destroy his very valuable piece of military equipment and then go off to nearly kill herself in a death battle that she can't possibly win. This is her trust in the information has been shattered. There's a Platonist parallel I won't bring in to keep things short. She thought she had to justify true belief, but
oh, not the justified true belief.
Not the yeah, we're all unconcealment bros here. Unverborgenheit. Yeehaw, German hours. Sorry. That's totally set for anyone sitting that doesn't do philosophy, get into philosophy often. That is a totally separate. Don't worry about. Yeah, somebody left. Somebody was like, "Oh no, not Plato." What Plato have to say about Kill la Kill? But yeah, our trust in knowledge is shattered. Senketsu itself, like, almost doesn't have quite the same impact on him. Admittedly, that might be due to time. There's a whole month that he had to internalize it that we don't see in the TV show.
Yeah.
But yeah, still, like, major impact on him. This is probably one of the biggest concerns about objectivity and knowledge today. Right? A lot of these disputes have to do with like our access to absolute truth or whatever. Not to say there's not any importance to those discussions, but the main threat of the destruction of knowledge is not our is not our knowledge of like the providential operations of the absolute through time and space. The main problem is that undermining knowledge undermining this sort of objective component to knowledge undermines our ability to truly connect with and know other people. Right? We have no knowledge of the other if we're just like totally incapable of perceiving them or knowing them.
All right.
And, maybe in the ultimate sense, I think Han thinks the other is unknowable, but in a more immediate sense, you need to know the other.
Yeah, there has to be some some comprehension of the subject and object there.
Yeah.
Or else, how can you communicate?
Yeah, and Wittgenstein makes this Wittgenstein. He's probably the more well known. It's his private language argument. It gets misunderstood. People think he's defending a realist position on language. Wittgenstein considered himself neither a realist nor a relativist. Wittgenstein's view, he's not defending the view. So the private language argument is, I have a box containing a beetle. The box is sealed. Hound says, "Hey, wild philosopher, what's in that box?" I say, "A beetle." Private language argument is if there's not common usage of the word beetle, if the word beetle is a purely private phenomena, like in Alice with the Looking Glass with the egg, it's like where she keeps saying, "Well, that's not what the word means," and Humpty Dumpty keeps saying, "Well, it can mean whatever I want it to mean." And keeps defining words willy-nilly, and basically there is no communication between Alice and Humpty Dumpty. Like, he's just misleading her the whole time until he eventually falls off the wall. So that's the sort of pride. And people think Wittgenstein's presenting a positive argument for why language must be shared. Wittgenstein wasn't that stupid. What he's doing is he's presenting an argument. He's not even presenting an argument. He's simply presenting an absolute condition under which language is meaningful.
All right. They're like, well, it just has to be this way to be meaningful. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like it just there has to be shared ground in how we use language.
Yeah.
And to put this back into Kill la Kill, Ryuko is not an emotionally expressive person. She expresses emotions. She's not good at, say, dealing with them. She struggles with that throughout the course of the series. I think that very accurate depiction of a teenage girl.
All right.
But what was I about to say? Oh yeah. The language issue here and the issue of the sort of objectivity of knowledge and issues of objectification is she's trying to communicate her suffering. And she is failing because she cannot put it into words.
Ooh.
Now, there's a separate discussion here about whether it has to be put into words, and I think you can argue no very convincingly. To be sort of the types of objective knowledge that Dilthey's solution to the issue of this problem is famously useless, so we're not going to discuss it. Everyone agrees he did an amazing job explaining what this problem is and why it's so important, and then designed the most useless and stupid solution.
Isn't that always the way? You're the perfect critique, and you're like, let's use ducks.
Yeah. His solution is interesting, but it just doesn't. Sorry, it doesn't work. And Paul Ricoeur points out about Dilthey. It's like, no, he says, nonetheless, he captured the essential truth that life meets life only when it's capable of communicating above the rise of without the mediation of units trapped in historical flux. That is from Paul Ricoeur, Hermeneutics and the Human Sciences. I want to say page 8 off the top of my head. So that being said, we can sort of cut that off. Yeah, I think that about sums up that last issue when it comes to objectification and knowledge in Kill la Kill. And I've been treating these as separate, but I actually think all of these interrelate, right?
Yeah. So communication is object, people is object, object is object.
Yeah, spirit, object, and spirit. But there is a way in which they all interrelate, right? In terms of work, like questions about what it takes to make truly meaningful work or labor, and questions about how to pass, questions about knowledge are not actually unrelated. Sometimes they might appear like there's no relationship between the two, right? Especially if you're like a janitor or something. But if you're involved in any sort of creation or like physical labor, there is an ongoing dialogue there. Different levels and perceptible at different times to different degrees, but they're nonetheless.
Yeah.
With that in mind, we've been going over 2 hours now. We did not get into the last area, which I guess sort of talking about fixity or experiences of objectivity or object. And we also did not talk about, I know we wanted to talk about honor, we wanted to talk about the family, and we wanted to talk about modesty a little.
Yeah,
but we've been going for
honor, shame, and modesty, I think, would be good.
Yeah, but we have been going for 2 hours now.
All right.
Do you want to call it here? And
Yep.
maybe meet.
And we'll pick this back up with a fresh episode with where we can discuss like actually there's I think those are good connective tissues. Like David De Silva has like honor, kinship, patronage, and purity. I think so. Those are all kind of connected, more social things rather than just about objects anymore. So that could be its own episode.
Yeah, well, we'll do another episode where we'll finish up. I wanna draw out, connect everything I spoke about today, and sort of draw it into ongoing discussions as to attempts to destroy stability in philosophy.
Ooh.
There's been a lot of movements from a lot of people, ranging from like some of the French postmodernists like Derrida to the American liberal thinkers like the neo-pragmatists, who really influenced a lot of your educational institutions, to even the New Age movement, to simply erasing ideas of being and fixity and stability, and replacing it with a world of endless becomings. And I think that has profoundly contributed to our modern malaise. So we will discuss that in more detail. That'll probably be a bit less connected to Kill la Kill. I might want to draw another anime into that.
All right.
But then we'll go back to Kill la Kill and talk about everything Hound just mentioned. I am not currently on work, thanks to some stuff IRL, so I will certainly be streaming again before my next stream with Ryan on Thursday. Whether Hound wants to join me is up to him. Like if he wants to just keep doing this over Sundays or speed things up. But yeah, I have been Wild Philosopher. He has been Hound of Heaven. I'm cringing the entire time here.
Yeah,
if you enjoyed this,
this is subscribe, people. We gotta spread the fun news of objectification to the masses, and why we should all be doing it all the time.
Yes, the sooner I hit more subs, the more time I can spend on this, the more effort I can put into this. Like the more other people will watch it, because that's the way the algorithm works. And I mean, I don't want to sound crass and materialistic here, but yeah, like if we start turning some sort of income from this, then that really does increase the amount of advice and the amount of depth we can go into here. If you liked this, like, comment, subscribe. I have books, mostly fiction. I haven't finished my nonfiction manuscripts for publication yet. I'm still in the final editing phases, but I do have some fiction available in the video description link. It all helps. It all helps. This is in our quest to bring philosophy to the world. Awaken the souls. Willy Winky ran through the town. Something in his. Awakening the people at night. But with that, I have been Wild Philosopher. He has been Hound. Thank you very much. You have a great evening.
Night.